have evidence that somebody had the capacity to explore the world during the last ice age.
All right, let's see it.
One of the things I find most striking is the presence of Antarctica on ancient maps, because we didn't discover it until 1820, and yet it's on maps drawn in the 1500s with great detail, which again were based on much older source maps that have now been lost to us.
So this is not a map of Antarctica. The details are not accurate at all, and these maps are only consistent from one to another to the degree that one cartographer copied another. They're also not based on any earlier maps. In fact, the earliest map on which this continent appears, a globe from 1523, actually has written on it only recently discovered but not yet explored, which is precisely how you would account for its absence from earlier maps, not its presence in earlier maps. This is a landmass known as Terra Australis, which is a continent that had been hypothesized by scholars as far back as Aristotle and Pythagoras, who thought that for the sake of symmetry, all of the land masses in the northern hemisphere ought to be balanced by a similar amount of land in the southern hemisphere. And since we did not know about as much land in the south, they hypothesized that there must be some kind of continent near the South Pole. So we see this also talked about in Cicero. We see it in Ptolemy in the 2nd century CE. It's talked about sometimes in the medieval period, but because some folks also hypothesized that the continent was inhabited by a race of people whose feet pointed the other direction, and who were not related to the humans who inhabited the northern hemisphere, it was considered heretical for Christians to talk about it. So it's not really until the 16th century that it begins to appear on maps in 1523 and then after.
They call it the southern land, and it's larger than it is today, but it was larger than it is today. Now what the fuck is it doing on a map drawn in the 1500s, which we know was based on older source maps when nobody knew it existed in the 1500s? To me, the obvious answer is we are dealing with the fingerprints of a lost civilization that mapped the world and that left evidence of that mapping, which ancient map makers found and used and incorporated into their map.
So here Hancock is withholding information about what we've known about Terra Australis for a long time. In fact, if you want to hear more about the history of Terra Australis and its representation in maps, there's a great book from 1995 by William Eisler called The Furthest Shore: Images of Terra Australis from the Middle Ages to Captain Cook. And you can pause to read if you'd like to learn a little bit about the origins of this idea. And Hancock here is also knowingly asserting falsehoods. There are no data that indicate that the 1523 map that first shows Terra Australis was based on earlier source maps. In fact, it pretty clearly is missing from all earlier source maps, which is why the cartographer has written on there that it was only recently discovered. So Hancock is either promoting just profoundly ignorant misinformation or profoundly deceptive disinformation.